Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Ichigo has come an incredibly long way since the start of Bleach. As of the 1000-year Blood War arc, we've seen him finally gain the answers to long-standing questions about his heritage and the origins of his power, and at last come to understand what makes him the way he is, and why he's so inherently strong. During the much-loved sequence The Blade Is Me, Ichigo learns the truth about Zangetsu, and the man he once thought was his trusted partner. But in doing so, Ichigo comes to a place of clarity regarding the relationship between Shinigami and Zanpakutō, and what it's really supposed to mean, and accepts that his power is one that's made up of all different aspects: Shinigami, Hollow, and Quincy. So, Ichigo's in a great place right now, the best he's ever been. But what about the Ichigo of the past, that used to be considered the absolute pinnacle of his power, that didn't have all the answers? At the end of the Arrancar arc, as Aizen ascended to new, godly heights, Ichigo was forced to do the same in order to save Karakura Town from annihilation. During the Deicide sub-arc, Ichigo embarked on his Dangai training, where, under tutelage from his father Isshin, Ichigo spent 3 months' worth of time battling who he believed to be Tensor Zangetsu, and later a fusion of all of his powers. Upon emerging from the Dangai, Ichigo was a changed man, and for a long time we believed this was the most powerful version of Ichigo, one who had transcended to a different plane. Times have changed a lot since then. The concept of transcendence in Bleach as we knew it is mostly dropped after the Deicide arc, yet we do well to remember it. In this video, which is going to be something of a ramble, a stream of consciousness, I want to take a look at just how powerful the Dangai version of Ichigo really was, and how his training here turned out to be extremely similar to what would unfold in the events of The Blade Is Me of the 1000-year Blood War arc, to the point where it's essentially a precursor to those revelations, and how when looking at Ichigo's power today, the training in the Dangai is perhaps something we should pay a little more attention to. So, let's take a look. Cast your minds back to the Deicide arc. Aizen has transcended, a concept here which signifies the breaking of the boundaries between Shinigami and Hollow to acquire a greater power that neither individual race can attain on their own. Let's take a brief look at transcendence and how it's used. In Bleach, the idea behind transcendence refers to a crossing of the planes of existence, which essentially boils down to how powerful someone is based on how many barriers they've broken, whether naturally or artificially. Characters like Kisuke, Isshin, and Yoruichi, while extremely powerful, are not transcendent. They're just Shinigami. That's the only power in their makeup. That's why they're unable to even sense Aizen's Reiatsu when he begins to evolve. As Aizen later notes, without him explicitly making it so, two-dimensional beings cannot interfere with three-dimensional ones. Once Aizen is enveloped in the Hogyoku's cocoon, it begins to restructure his soul, essentially adding another element, an element that appears to be at least somewhat hollow in nature, as evidenced by Aizen's later appearance, and making him someone who has now surpassed both forms. Aizen states that he would never hollowfy in the traditional sense, but the Hogyoku restructures his soul to place him on a higher plane than just a regular Shinigami or Hollow, essentially as close as can be anyway, naturally merging both Shinigami and Hollow in his soul, as opposed to hollowfying in the way a Vizard might find themselves, which is an aberration against nature. It is not a natural step upwards. Meanwhile, even before his Dangai training takes place, Ichigo can still sense Aizen's Reiatsu while no one else can. This is because he's already technically transcendent, he's already technically on the same level as Aizen due to being a natural hybrid of Shinigami, Hollow, and Quincy, even if he doesn't fully know it yet. Realizing Ichigo is their only hope due to this latent power lying dormant within him, Isshin decides to quickly teach him the Final Getsuga Tenshou and bring out the best of his strength. So I guess to try and simplify, Aizen is artificially transcendent. He was originally just a Shinigami, albeit a monstrously powerful one with incredible potential, who then essentially remade his soul with the Hogyoku to turn himself into a three-dimensional being. So Aizen can now be considered a mix of Shinigami and Hollow as a being who now surpasses both, able to reach heights, as I mentioned a minute ago, they individually would never be able to do. But as Ichigo is naturally made up of Shinigami, Hollow, and Quincy as an additional factor, that makes him a being a dimension higher than Aizen on a higher plane than Aizen can achieve. Training in the Dangai brings that power to the forefront and helps Ichigo reach that level on a timescale that is perhaps more appropriate. Notice as well that both Ichigo and Aizen fuse with their Zanpakutō once they transcend. Aizen speculates that the fusing of Shinigami and Zanpakutō may very well be the final stage of a Shinigami's evolution. And it seems he's correct, because as we learn in The Blade Is Me, Shinigami and Zanpakutō aren't friends, nor family, nor partners, nor weapons, nor tools. They are one and the same, and so it makes sense that by the time a Shinigami achieves their ultimate power, they and their Zanpakutō would inhabit the same body, the same form. Ichigo is Zangetsu, Aizen is Kyokusuigetsu. That's the fundamental truth that comes out of The Blade Is Me. That's what separates this version of Aizen from, like I said a minute ago, a Vizard or an Arankar, who theoretically has also surpassed Shinigami and Hollow, but they haven't really. They are artificial stepping stones, essentially, while what Aizen and then later Ichigo have gone through is very much the real deal. Though again, in order to reach these heights, no matter how powerful Aizen is in a raw sense, this is not something he could have achieved without the Hogyoku, while Ichigo technically has by being a natural-born hybrid. Anyway, all of that plays nicely into how strong Dangai Ichigo really is, and why there are more similarities between him and the Ichigo of The Blade Is Me than you might think. Ichigo arrives on the scene in Karakura Town having trained in the Dangai constantly for 3 months. As a result, his appearance has changed slightly. He now has much longer hair as a result of the time spent, but crucially, his right arm is now bare and wrapped entirely in the chain of his bankai. As for Tensei Zangetsu itself, the guard has now become elongated and the hilt has fused with his hand, much like Aizen's own Zanpakutō. In this form, Ichigo is capable of completely overpowering even this transcendent Aizen, grabbing him by the face and forcing him away from Karakura Town, violently flinging him down to the ground. Ichigo's current power defies logic to the point where Aizen desperately tries to rationalize what's happening in front of his own eyes. At first, he believes Ichigo has somehow exchanged all of his Ryoryoku for massive physical strength, enabling him to physically outmatch Aizen for just a moment. In Aizen's mind, this is how he rationalizes why he can't sense any power from Ichigo. But of course, that's not the case. The two of them then lock swords and a nearby mountain is destroyed, totally erased from existence as a result of the sword swing. Again, Aizen thinks the destruction of the mountain was a result of his own movement, when in fact it was obliterated due to Ichigo's strike. Ichigo then completely wipes out a fully powered Hado 90, shattering it with his bare hand before revealing the truth to an incredulous Aizen. He is the one very much in control of this fight. To interject briefly, it should be noted here that even in the 1000-year Blood War arc, where power levels seem to be spiking all over the place, we don't really see any transcendent beings. The Stern Ritter, albeit monstrously powerful, are all just Quincy, at least for the most part, while even the Zero Division are just Shinigami, at least for the most part. The reason I say for the most part is that things get a bit messy when the Soul King gets involved. Since we still don't really know what Ryo is outside of being a god, it's hard to know exactly what kind of an effect his power has on those he bestows it to. For example, someone like Ichibei, an extraordinary being, is clearly more than just a Shinigami, even though he is the precursor to them all. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's transcendent. However, the influence of Ryo on him and the rest of Squad Zero likely makes them more than simple Shinigami. And Ichibei is again a special case. He's an extraordinary being who came into being way before the Shinigami were really a thing, so we have really no idea what he is. Maybe he is transcendent, or maybe he really is just the absolute pinnacle of what a singular Shinigami can be. And again, in my opinion, Yhwach isn't transcendent to begin with either. He's just the absolute strongest example of a Quincy. But once he absorbs the Soul King, it kind of all goes out the window and it becomes much harder to say for sure. Anyway, that's not really germane to this discussion, but it is something I'd like to have a look at in a separate video, I think. But Ichigo continues to essentially play with Aizen, only taking damage when his arm is scorched by Aizen's explosive Fragor ability. But aside from that, he remains defiant, even in the face of his constantly evolving adversary, and pushes him back before activating the Final Getsuga Tenshou. And so here, even before the Final Getsuga Tenshou is revealed, we've seen an Ichigo unlike any that's come before, or after for that matter. But what got him to this place? What did his training involve? Let's take a look and see how it compares and contrasts with what would come later in The Blade Is Me. In the end, you might find that Dangai Ichigo ends up in a very similar place. But before we carry on, first, a message from today's sponsor. Tokyo Treat and Sakurako are back, and this month Mrs. Tomo and I are going to dive into the worlds of Ninja Snack Venture and the flavours of Hakone to see how these snack boxes can help you to experience a taste of Japan from the comfort of your own home. First of all, let's take a look at Tokyo Treat. Tokyo Treat is a monthly pop Japanese snack subscription box that includes up to 20 seasonal snacks, including instant ramen and drinks only available in Japan for a limited time. This month's theme is extremely fun, celebrating the famously stealthy shinobi of Japan, and it comes complete with a candy-filled katana that you can probably perform bankai with. Don't quote me on that though. Alongside the katana, other treats this month include chocolate orange Kit Kats, Endo pea chips, and a frankly adorable Pandaro cookie. Indulge in some Japanese culture while learning a little more about the shadowy ninja, including a cameo appearance from anime's most iconic ramen-loving shinobi.
Meanwhile, dialing things back a bit, this time Sakurako's theme is the flavours of Hakone. Sakurako puts the emphasis on authenticity, proudly supporting local Japanese snack makers with a focus on traditional artisan Japanese snacks. Located among the mountains of the Kanagawa prefecture, Hakone delivers a stunning backdrop of ancient shrines and incredible onsen, taking visitors on a journey back through time. This month, to embolden the theme, Sakurako has included a variety of 20 snacks inspired by the confectioners of the area, including mini green apple mochi, wasabi okaki, and a refreshing Hakone story Ryokucha green tea. And Sakurako always go an extra step, including a piece of beautiful tableware. This time we have the stunning marquetry plate. This guy here. Now, I can't have these because they're not vegetarian. However, I really want you to try one because...
Okay.
Look at his face.
It's nice.
Oh.
Hey.
How do you throw an ninja
It's
stuff?
surprisingly sour, actually.
Okay, what do you want to do? We do not have snacks like I don't know how I'm going to show this without.
Tip it up slightly.
Oh, this could be catastrophic. But they're tiny.
I said half.
It's hard to control.
Alright. Here comes the panda. Oh,
little
look
guy.
at that.
Look at him. A good panda.
That's very nice, yeah. It was a good panda in life.
Oh, it's well buttery.
Jesus, it's so violent!
It looks squidgy. Is it meant to look eggy? It does kind of look like
Yeah,
an egg.
it's supposed to look like an egg. There's the yolk.
So is it like, it's sweet, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is a Yokohama raisin sandwich. So I don't know if you can see on camera, but it's just got like raisins sitting between. I love raisins, so this is my kind of treat.
So this is apparently soaked in brandy syrup. It contains 0.3% alcohol. Please consume responsibly. That's bloody nice.
What is it?
It's good.
Thank you. That is good.
Honestly, probably one of my favourite things about the boxes is how they do go the extra mile. Rather than just bunching a load of snacks together and calling it a day, they take the time and effort to build them and the boxes around a theme, and it works really well. And of course, no matter which box you choose, each one comes with a detailed booklet that tells you everything you need to know about the snacks inside, including allergen information.
The booklets also include fun facts relating to the theme of the month, so whether that's the thrilling history of the ninja or the therapeutic and natural beauty of Hakone.
As well as plenty of fun ways to get involved with the Tokyo Treat and Sakurako community. But that's it for May's fun and thoughtful boxes. As always, I want to say a big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel by sponsoring today's video. If you want to treat yourself or someone you know to one of these boxes, then make sure to follow the links down in the description and the pinned comment and use my code TOMO for $5 off your purchase. Thanks everyone, and enjoy. Let's look at what we know. Up until now, Old Man Zangetsu has been a fraud. In an effort to prevent Ichigo from going down a dangerous path and chasing his destiny as a Shinigami, Old Man Zangetsu, the embodiment of the Quincy powers inherited from his mother, and so maybe there's some inherent will to protect there, has been suppressing Ichigo's true power this entire time, while posing as a Shinigami soul. The real embodiment of Zangetsu is none other than someone who has been here from the very beginning, Hollow Ichigo, more accurately known later as White, as he is the fusion of Ichigo's Shinigami and Hollow powers all rolled into one. We had no idea this was the case during the Arrancar arc, believing instead that White was a malevolent entity lurking inside Ichigo's soul, despite him telling us explicitly that he is Zangetsu as well. So when Ichigo arrives in his inner world during his Dangai training, he is met with a new face, a young man claiming to be the embodiment of Tensa Zangetsu. This is, as we know, part of the elaborate ruse to keep Ichigo in the dark. In reality, Tensa Zangetsu is Yuha Bark as he looked when he was a teenager. But Tensa Zangetsu isn't the only person there. White returns after a considerable absence, only this time he looks a little different. He's now wearing a combination of Ichigo's horned hollow mask and his bankai shihakusho, reflecting the fusion of Shinigami and hollow powers present within him. And so, just like that, right in front of us, right here back during the Deicide arc, we have every aspect of Ichigo's power gathered in one place. Tensa Zangetsu represents Ichigo's Quincy powers, while White represents his Shinigami and Hollow powers, and outwardly looks as such. And so what happens next? They become one. As if to really hammer home that yes, White is a legitimate part of Ichigo's actual power that he was born with, and not some evil invasive parasite, White and Tensa become one single being, a fusion of all the elements of Ichigo's power. When you think about it, this man, known as White Tensa, is a reflection of Ichigo's true and complete power. Nothing has been left off the table in this moment. Sure, they're still keeping Ichigo in the dark about their individual identities, but I mean, it's all here all the same. Now they've become one, the Quincy powers are clearly no longer suppressing Ichigo's true strength. I mean, what would be the need? What would be the point at this moment in time, when you've now gone this far? Instead, Ichigo must now battle this manifestation of everything he is, even if he doesn't know it yet. Ichigo, and at the time we the readers, believe that he's just fighting his Shinigami and Hollow powers, but in reality his Quincy powers are taking part too in a big way. Eventually, in the end, after a 3-month-long battle, Ichigo accepts the truth. He allows himself to be run through by White Tensor, accepting the Spirit's Blade. Ichigo is surprised that he isn't feeling any pain, but White Tensor tells him something very prescient that seems to have been forgotten by the time of The Blade Is Me, and I quote, "Of course not. Tensor Zangetsu is you." So the spirits of Ichigo's power were trying to tell him even back here the absolute cardinal truth, that a Shinigami and their Zanpakutō are one and the same. And so, as you can see, it turns out that the Dangai training is actually extremely similar, if a little more hands-on, to what we would later get during The Blade Is Me. Ichigo faces all aspects of his power, including that of the Quincy, and eventually accepts it as being a part of him, which is what gives him access to such immense strength. The sole difference between the Dangai training and The Blade Is Me is that here Ichigo doesn't actually know the truth of what's going on, he's just kind of going along for the ride. During The Blade Is Me, Ichigo discovers the ruse and learns that Old Man Zangetsu, and by extension Tensor Zangetsu during Deicide, were lying about their identities. However, the truth has always been the same. They're a part of him and of his power, no matter what they call themselves. Ichigo accepts them here just as he did during Deicide. It feels like at some point between Deicide and The Blade Is Me that Ichigo forgot the fact that Zangetsu is him and had to relearn that universal truth. But really, when we compare the two, they are very similar, so what's actually going on? What's the difference here? Well, clearly when Ichigo faces off against Aizen, he's still using his fake bankai, Dangai power-up or not. So while he's accepted all of his powers as being a part of him, he's still wielding his artificial Zanpakutō that he received at the start of the series through the Shattered Shaft training. The problem is, even if Zangetsu and White had told Ichigo the truth during Deicide, and he'd found an Asauchi to call his own as a result of that acceptance, they couldn't have just given him his true Zanpakutō without Oetsu's help. So perhaps they decided to just stick with what he'd been using up until now, as they were kind of on a timer, and it was enough to get the job done. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Dangai training feels like The Blade Is Me only about 150 chapters earlier. Does this mean that Dangai Ichigo is at least as strong as Ichigo's true Shikai, if not maybe a bit stronger? Just how suppressed really was Ichigo's true power? Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't make sense for Zangetsu to be holding back Ichigo's strength in this particular moment. The only thing holding him back as far as we're aware is that he isn't wielding his true blade. That being said, if that is the case, which it is, it's weird that his Zanpakutō was able to fuse with his hand after transcending. Aizen even notes that this is perhaps the natural true form of the Zanpakutō after all, but Ichigo's Tensor Zangetsu isn't even real here. Perhaps the greatest evidence to the fact that Zangetsu isn't suppressing Ichigo's powers in this moment is the existence of the Final Getsuga Tenshou. Ichigo quite literally becomes Getsuga in this form, and I'm still somewhat convinced that in this moment, he is the strongest we've ever seen him. It's very difficult to compare it to his true bankai, as we haven't really seen a lot of that, but I mean, he does kill God in one hit with that thing, so that's making a pretty good case for being at the top. But with a single swipe of his ghostly, shadowy blade, he obliterates Aizen's body, stripping him of virtually all of his transformations so far, and leaving him a mangled mess on the ground. Considering Ichigo's latent power, any ability that essentially uses it all up in exchange for it has got to be at the upper echelon of Ichigo's strength. In this moment, both Ichigo and White Tensor know that by using this form, this ability, there'll be nothing left over in the end. Ichigo will lose his Shinigami powers and presumably the hollow powers that were fused with them. So what would be the point in holding him back anymore if you kind of know this is the end regardless? I'm assuming, since Tensou was fused with white in order for Ichigo to attain this ability in the first place, that his Quincy powers went with it too, hence why he can no longer see spirits at all. Though, even after he regained his Shinigami and Hollow powers as of the Lost Agent arc, his Quincy ones would continue to lie dormant until his battle with Kirige. I suppose the question we should be asking is this: can Ichigo relearn the Final Getsuga Tenshou now that he's got his true Zanpakutō? And if he can, how different would it really be? How much more powerful? Would he even need to relearn it now that he's truly accepted them as his power? Or perhaps he can simply use it whenever he likes now? If he were to use it now, would he still lose all of his powers, or has he got more in the tank? Without that comparison, it is difficult to know anything for sure, but I have a hard time believing Dangai Ichigo wouldn't also totally smack the Bambis around like they were nothing. Interestingly, during The Blade Is Me, we see a brief flashback to the Dangai training that gives us some insight into where Kubo was at when writing this sequence, into how he viewed that training from the lens of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Ichigo notes that he won't ask them to fight with him anymore, thinking back to the Dangai training. As The Blade Is Me is meant to be the culmination of his journey until now, he's meant to be learning from the mistakes of each previous encounter. While Ichigo never explicitly asks them to fight alongside him during the Dangai training, he is desperate for them to teach him the Final Getsuga Tenshou. Therefore, perhaps the lesson here is simple. If Ichigo had just accepted all of his power before this moment, including his hollow power, which, if you'll remember, he was subconsciously terrified of after the Ulquiorra battle, then he would have been able to learn the Final Getsuga Tenshou without having to fight them for it. When you look at Ichigo's complete journey, and I want to make a video on this too, but it's quite the endeavour, it all slots in nicely by the end. His training with the Vizards, for example, was more of a band-aid in an emergency situation than anything else, artificially stomping down what he believed to be a malignant entity in his hollow powers to try and force it to heal. Here, in his transcendent form, after his training in the Dangai, he has accepted all of them as part of his soul, just as he does in The Blade Is Me. Only here in the Dangai, he doesn't really know the extent of what he's accepting. And so, as we reach the end, how much of a difference is his true Zanpakutō really making? Presumably a considerable one. And when you consider that this version, the Dangai version of Ichigo using his fake Zanpakutō, was still enough to crush a transcendent Aizen, well, it feels like we've still yet to see what Ichigo's upper limit really is. Well, I think for now that's probably it for this video. I'm not sure I really answered any of my own questions, to be honest. I mean, how strong really is Dangai Ichigo? There's a part of me that has a hard time reconciling with the fact that maybe he is weaker than Ichigo's true Shikai, because what we see him do is just on such another level. It's such a godly power. But I mean, Ichigo has, by The Blade Is Me, finally learnt who he really is and been given access to his true Zanpakutō, his true strength, so there's bound to be some kind of gulf there. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, I'd love to hear it. In the future, I might make a video that is much more an explicit comparison between Dangai Ichigo and the Ichigo we see at the end of the series, where perhaps the answer might become more clear-cut. But I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this messy ramble of a video down in the comments below. This is a winding topic that we can absolutely come back to in the future, and in fact, I think we'll probably have to. But as always, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. If you like what I do here on YouTube and you want to support me on Patreon too, you can do just that, to get your name in the credits just like this and to get every video I release absolutely ad-free. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.